feeling more confident about understanding your children's rights.
So as Beth was mentioning there, obviously about children's rights, so when we're talking about children's rights, we're mostly going to be focusing on children's rights around support in school, but it's important to obviously acknowledge that the children have a whole host of rights that they're protected by a number of different pieces of legislation. This includes the rights in education, have their views be heard, and the rights to understand, obviously, the newly incorporated UNCRC. But just now we're going to focus on additional support for learning laws, which for here it only applies to children who are attending local authority nurseries or schools, or who have been placed in different schools that are funded by the local authority. If your children and young people go to an independent school or are home educated, then the ASL legislation doesn't apply. However, we've got specific fact sheets about independent schools and home education, which I would encourage you to go and check them out. But you can also find hopefully get lots of information that can still be helpful as partly of coming together later on about working with the schools, that hopefully we can help you with as well. We're also talking about the rights as well to do with parents and carers. It's really important to acknowledge that you have your own rights. In the context that we're talking about today is, in particular, you've got your rights to share your views about your child's education, about their support, and have your views taken into account. The whole part of that is about you are part of that planning process. You also, if you're going into meetings, you have the right to have a supporter or an advocate at the meetings. It could be friends, family members, or as I say, a professional advocate. And I think as well, to make sure, and some of you may already know, but you do have the right to ask for your child to be assessed, in particular for a specific concern that you have, or things about if you want them to be assessed for a coordinated support plan, which is a specific type of learning protected by the law. And you also do have that right to ask a local authority to place your child in a different school. And this is what we call as making a placing request. I think one of the big things as well is what's really important is under the Parental Involvement Act, it recognises the vital role that parents and carers play in their child's learning and the development. And the aims for that as well is to encourage parents to develop their learning at home and within the communities. And then with that, in the Act is reflecting and sharing those roles and responsibilities with the schools and working together, because a lot of the things that we hope is that when you're developing within school, they're developing at home, and that can all mirror together.
Definitely, thanks Sharon. So when we're talking today, we're mostly focused on additional support for learning and additional support for learning legislation. So very first point to start with really is what those rights mean. So if your child needs support for whatever reason, then they are entitled to support. So if they can't benefit from school education without extra help for any reason, they are entitled to support. The definition, for whatever reason, is really broad, and we wanted to put up some examples here just to give you a sense of what that might mean. This list is by no means exhaustive, but it's just an idea to think about. I think a lot of people associate support at school or additional support needs with diagnosed conditions or with particular things like autism. And of course, those things definitely do fall under additional support for learning, but it's important to remember that first of all, you don't need a diagnosis to be entitled to support. But also those support needs can be really, really broad, and they're often interconnected. So obviously today we're going to be focusing a little bit on autism, and we know that autism affects children at school in lots of different ways. But if anything else is going on at home, if that autism is impacting on other things, like for example, friendships or bullying, or maybe it's the sensory needs that come alongside with autism, all of those things fall under additional support needs, which means that your child has a right to get support with those things.
We mentioned earlier that you hear a lot about things to do with the schools, but actually the local authorities' duties is vital to know as well, is because additional support for learning actually falls under the local authority, the education department at your local council. And in practice, it's often the schools who will do a lot of the planning, provide all the support for the children on behalf of the local authority. But they, as in the local authority, have that duty to provide an adequate and efficient provision for support. This includes identifying, obviously, the children's needs, planning their support, and keeping that support under review. When they're saying about, identifying needs, that can obviously be a range of things, including, the child's school, doing observations, and the areas that they may need support in within school. And it should also include listening to your views and your children's views. And this could be done in an informal way. It could be maybe just a chat at the classroom door, or it could be more informal, like a proper child planning meeting. And if there is a lot of things to discuss with the school and you've got particular concerns, sometimes identifying those needs would do require a more formal assessment or to seek a diagnosis. And we have a fact sheet on identifying needs that has a lot more information that you can absolutely have a look at. And I think as well, when it's coming to planning this support, it's really important to know that planning is an ongoing process. It's not a one-stop shop, because children's support will change as their needs change. It could be they need more or they don't need as much, but all children should have some kinds of personal learning plan. And for children with additional support needs, it might be that planning is needed to be more in place to be able to get that right support. And it's important about recording this to make sure that it's covering all the different areas. But we would always and often recommend that for parents and carers to talk to the school about what kind of written plans they have, because a lot of them use different names of local authorities. And again, it's more about, what's appropriate, what needs to be recorded, and most importantly, what your child's needs are. Again, as I've mentioned about the fact sheet for identifying needs, we have more information on our planning section on our website. We mentioned when we're talking about support, obviously additional support needs can mean many, many different things. And we've got a few examples obviously shown here about what support looks like, but by no means is this an exhaustive list, because we know there can be multiple reasons. And we've said it before, support must be based on a child's individual needs, and that the planning should include the families and the children themselves as much as they can be involved. And as we've already mentioned, needs do change. Support can change too. Sometimes children need more or extra support in different subjects, different areas, or at different times of their lives. For example, when they're changing schools, or support can be viewed as a key part of their planning process. I think from here as well, you will see that some kinds of the support at school can be potentially put in place pretty quickly and without needing lots of extra resources, while others clearly would probably need a lot more involvement, possibly needing other specialists and maybe some assessments being requested. But I think what is really important is sometimes it's this, and we will know this and you will know this, the smallest of changes can really make such a big difference. So start by asking the school to what they think might help. A good place of it sometimes to start is if you're thinking collectively, they talk about the team around the child meetings. That's really what it is.
I think you need to be in a school with a space. I don't think you need to be in just
Sorry, somebody's speaking.
Can
you make sure that you mute yourself, please?
Sorry about that. So they will obviously, the teachers and the professionals that are supporting your children, they have their own expertise and knowledge about what they think will work for the children in class. So you come along with your expertise of your child as well, and that's when hopefully you can share things together, see what can be worked. And we mentioned earlier on about your learning at home. Sometimes, and the hope is that the work that you've done, and if it's worked well and you feel that could be implemented, then it could maybe be mirrored at home and vice versa. So there's some continuity, and that will help, because we obviously know lots of children with autism like routine, they like the purpose of that. So, and that can sometimes help, as we said earlier, to move things along a little bit quicker and maybe improve things on a shorter time scale, whilst other things obviously we might need to wait for other inputs from other services. So as we've got Deborah and Craig here, so I'm going to pass you over now, and they're going to talk more specifically about how autistic children can be supported in school.
Oh, you're muted, Deborah.
rookie mistake there. Thank you, thanks. I'm going to start us off tonight, and Craig's going to do the next couple of slides. I thought it would be useful to just start by outlining how autism can impact learning, and then go on to explain examples of the supports and considerations at school that could be helpful in the next slides that follow. I do think that staff understanding these what we would kind of term as cognitive theories can help in terms of understanding the difficulties and the strengths that we see presented. If we understand the why, then our approach is more likely to be successful, and because it's informed. I think what I would like to also just note is that there will be many other factors impacting, what we would coin as a kind of a pupil profile. And that is regardless of what a young person might be dealing with. So I think it's just important to remember that will impact learning and engagement, such as trauma or sensory processing, a learning difficulty, for example. So theory of mind is the ability to understand the mental states of each other. This helps us kind of make sense and predict the behaviour of other people, and also understand our own and other emotions. It's thought that this is underdeveloped in autistic people by about 4 to 5 years. And what that sometimes then shows itself as is that they can appear rude, and they assume that you know what they know, and there can be then difficulties between fantasy and reality. I'm really just skimming the surface of these just to kind of give you a bit of context for where I would then explain some of the examples of support. Central coherence was really the kind of first theory that really attempted to explain the skills and the strengths that we see that go with autism, but it does impact the ability to then pull together information into context and get that kind of rounded meaning and gist of things. So, for example, some of our learners will become very fixated on detail and parts, leaning more on the kind of rote learning rather than maybe understanding the fuller picture. And executive functioning, that it is associated with the frontal lobes of the brain, and has impact on controlling impulses, planning, your working memory. So this is also impacted in people with ADHD as well. So all the learning and teaching approaches that we need to consider should really be built on a model of understanding a child and young person's autism, and how that shows up for them, as well as their developmental stage, and as well as any barriers to learning, such as health or adverse childhood experiences, for example. Sometimes we find that it's quite helpful to ask for a cognitive or a functional assessment, because and that's usually carried out by like a education psychologist. Sometimes CAMs can be asked to carry that out, but that information can be a useful kind of point in time for explaining often the spiky profile that we see with our young people, and the strengths that they have, but also the areas that we need to support, and actually having an assessment and seeing that. I found certainly in my own teaching practice and working with colleagues, that can be one of the most helpful things to start from. So you can ask for that. Creating a kind of structured environment, that won't really be news to you, but it's fundamental to being able to develop the independence of our young people, and also reduce their stress levels. We kind of talk about that environment, along with the use of visuals, which we'll come on to, is really kind of bread and butter. We need to have that right, and then we can build on other things after that. The content of the curriculum, we need to encourage that to be through meaningful contexts. And I do think as a general, we are much better at doing that in education as a whole now. We really understand why that's much more helpful to all young people in terms of being able to transfer skills and make the links, particularly for our guys. So it's about finding things that they are highly motivated and engaged in, and really focusing on that. If school are struggling to engage and develop that rapport, then taking that skills and strengths-based approach can be really a very effective way of supporting learning, and providing opportunities for personal achievement as well. We want to really bolster the self-esteem of our young people, because we acknowledge that can often be very fragile. And it really allows us to kind of highlight the value and where their skill set lies. And often what we find is if we're doing that, we're getting that right, the other bits come along anyway. So it's not always about, sometimes we look at filling the gaps, and that can take us down a very difficult path. So I would always start with where the young person's at. Play, I've kind of noted these. I'm just going through these briefly, because I've hopefully given a little bit of detail here anyway for you to go away and have a think about. But play is something that we focus very, very well on in our own school. And I think how autistic young people play may look different, but play is still play. And the value of play in terms of self-regulation, gross and fine motor skills, problem solving, creative thinking, it's still the same. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't look the same, and whilst they should have the same opportunities and entitlements to play, and that's what we really advocate for as their peers, they shouldn't be encouraged to play the same. They will still be getting a benefit from that. I think if we're allowing space for our young people to do that, that can be really valuable. And I've just put a couple of other bullet points on that one about being very explicit. Don't assume that context. Being very clear of the start and end points of a task. It might not be enough just to say that it's time for maths or it's time for PE, or but to break that down further and chunk that so the young person really understands what they've to do within that, how long that activity is going to take, what's expected of them and when it will be finished. So being as clear as possible I think what we're trying to do is provide predictability to the young person, and also just lower those some of those stress levels that can be very high for our young people. And we'll go on to talk about that in the next few slides. But for now, I'll pass over to Craig, who's going to do the next couple of slides for you.
Thank you. Yeah, so obviously we are very fortunate, I would say, in the school that we operate in, with the environment that we have. But getting the environment right for our young people is essential. I don't really like to bring it up because it's been now 4 years, but since COVID. But after we came back as a school from COVID and from time away from school and coming back together again, one of the big focuses that we talked about was about making sure our young people were feeling safe and were feeling happy. And getting an environment right for them was essential for that. And that message has stayed with me over those 4 years and continues today. So anytime we bring in new young people into our school, into our setting, it's very much at the forefront of my mind. If we can get that right for them, if they can feel safe and feel happy in the space that they're in, with the people around them, with the staff that they're working with, then it opens up all these other opportunities, just like Deborah was saying there about feeding into playing to the young people's strengths, really focusing on them and building up that sense of achievement and those opportunities for their young people, focused on those strengths. If we do all these things, everything all joins together. It's that kind of big jigsaw and bringing it all together for us. So in school environments typically can be very challenging for our young people. When we think about the size of a school building, we think about the noise, the other people there. There's a lot of transitions as well throughout the day. Maybe working with multiple people as well within a day. So all of these various components can then make the environment very challenging and difficult for our young people. When we think about how an autistic person may prepare to work, prepare to learn, but they may think about these flow states. So we think about activities that they become really invested in, have a real interest in, that they find really rewarding as well and can be fully immersed in. And there's loads of great opportunities for learning that can come from that. But again, within the environment, if there's lots of changes and lots of transitions through that day, then it can become very difficult for those opportunities to be there for that person, to be able to work through those things and to get that sense of achievement and to really get invested in those activities. And then also really thinking about within the environment, what is it that the young person needs? And there's some examples there about personalised space, about opportunities for chewing, for stimming, these kind of things also to be really taken into consideration about what can be provided to them to allow them to feel safe and comfortable and happy within the environment that they're in, so that they're then going to be able to achieve what we were hoping for them to be achieved. There we are, thank you. Also really considering about the sensory input within a young person. So within our school, all of our young people have a sensory profile that we build up over a period of time. All the members of staff who work with them, with our young people, all contribute to putting that together. So we're really thinking about the various factors that play there in terms of what that young person needs sensory-wise, but also what sensory input is too much for them, what can be quite overstimulating for them, and what might that look like as well. So we really consider things, the lights, like touch, what that might feel like for them, sounds as well. And again, if we're thinking about school environments and lots of other young people there, or things like that bell going off every 50 minutes for a change of periods, all of these can really have an impact. All these sensory inputs can have an impact on the young person. Also, the time it can take for that young person to process those things too. So it may be that while at school, it can look one way, while at home, it can then look quite different as well, or between different settings and different places, even within the school, that can look quite different as well. So really kind of thinking about all of those factors, internally and externally, and what impact that has on the young person. I love the part there about validation of how autistic people experience their worries is key. I think for all of us to kind of understand how they view things, how that young person is viewing things is so important. And that saying about if you've met one person with autism, then you've met one person with autism. And it's really about getting to know that young person and getting to know our young people, I think is something that we do very well within our school. As I say, we're very fortunate within the environment that we work in. It's a lot smaller, and we really get the opportunities to get that time to get to know our young people, to be able to try our very best to get it right for them. But I think if you can get to know the young person, if you know what they're getting and where you're able to bring that in from them as well, that understanding has such a massive impact on them. Like I said before about time to process that sensory, having really opportunities to kind of think about that and what does that look like in their journey. And also other things, yes, so same again about reducing the sensory input, thinking about what you need. Other things as well, so quite often we maybe look at things sort of retrospectively after things have happened, but what could we do that's maybe proactive? So, for example, a young person who's maybe biting, so giving something to chew on, something like that, maybe helping support them. Is there a reason why they're doing that thing, or is there a reason for certain behaviours that we're seeing? Is there something that we could do in advance that's maybe going to help that young person to feel more safe, to feel more supported, to feel more regulated, that's then maybe not going to lead to something else? Is there other things that we could then look further into and delve into a bit further?
Back to me. Okay, so I mean, it's likely that you've probably seen examples of these visual supports. I think what I would say is that it's important to that the type of visual supports that we are using with our young people are appropriate to the level of communication of the young person, and this is where the likes of a speech and language therapist can be very helpful to guide that. There's no point in using a visual that is far too abstract for the level of communication ability of the young person. I've tried to sketch that out on the slide to show you the kind of hierarchy. So just to take you through that, OR is a kind of stands for objects of reference. So that's your most concrete. That's like, you know, your jacket's on and that's telling you that we're going, or the keys to the car, that kind of thing. And we all use them throughout. What we really advocate for is that total communication approach. So we might be using visual supports along with signing, for example, if that's appropriate for the young person, as well as using our verbal language. And depending on where the young person is at a moment in time, there'll be some supports that are more pertinent to that moment. For example, if a young person's feeling overwhelmed, we would want to reduce the verbal that we're using and make more use of the visual supports, but it should be part of the kind of totality of offering. Photographs, then, they're again very concrete, they represent the real thing. Then moving on to symbols, we would usually do coloured symbols before you do black and white symbols, and then kind of then on to the written word. The written word is still a visual, you know. I like to try and make that as clear as possible with the example of your shopping list, for example. We all take that list to the shops. It's still a visual support. So if that is an appropriate level for that young person, it may go alongside a symbol. But some of our young people, especially our older young people, will often talk about not wanting to seem different, or it feels baby having those visuals, those kind of symbols, which is absolutely fine, and we have to respect that. But they can have a written timetable or a written list of what they're to do to kind of support their understanding and their organisational skills. So yeah, just to be aware that it's an appropriate match. But